lot of my practice is really based around collaboration and community, finding opportunities to really connect with people. That's when I feel my most creative and just feels very wholesome and healing. Lately, a lot of my work has been to do with ancestry and ancestors. As I said, I have some family in the Punjab, and that's where I'm trying to figure out. Obviously, there is a rich tradition of gender nonconformity and transness around the world, and analogs of being transgender that exist outside our Western frameworks of it. And so I'm really excited to be delving into my ancestry and trying to find those examples of people who broke away from gender norms and gender roles in the past, and bring that out in my work. Right now I'm editing an issue of Room magazine, which is a fantastic literary journal published in Vancouver. And the theme of that issue is ancestors.
Fantastic. As I was going through the readings that you shared with us and thinking about your practice, I really started to think about when I lived in Toronto, most of the artists that I knew of who worked in an interdisciplinary way did so in a way that was sort of meant to intervene in kind of the mainstream art spaces. And what I was thinking about as I was reading your work was how interdisciplinarity is a kind of political practice for you, and it's not to the end of, sort of presentation in a mainstream place. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about interdisciplinarity and collaboration in your work before we move on to the "what does feminism mean to you" question.
I would love to answer that question. And interdisciplinary is a really good word. And also I just think there's so many different words that line up with that ethos and that kind of way I approach my practice, which is, it's very hybridized. It's very, what's the word, intergenre. It's really mixing and matching, the best pieces of what I love about, nonfiction, what I love about poetry, what I love about art, and, being able to facilitate stuff. I also have a strong background in anti-violence work, and I worked for several years at the Anti-Violence Project at UVic, delivering workshops and supporting survivors of sexualized violence. And so much of my work feels like an intervention into systems of harm and trying to introduce, support and representation, I guess is maybe a easy way of putting it. Trying to, tell the stories that I never really heard growing up, and tell them in ways that make sense to me, rather than ways that will be the most marketable or the most digestible, but telling them in the ways that actually challenge, narratives and challenge people to think about, the ways that they go about in the world. And yeah.
Yeah, I think when we were imagining this incubator and this opportunity to join in conversation with so many incredible artists, we already knew that our terms of engagement were troubled. We already could recognize from the beginning that the very proposal of a feminist art field school, we couldn't even move from there. And so we thought, well, why don't we cluster those words and then critically interrogate them from a variety of different sides? And I think, your response has animated much of what we think as well, which is how can we borrow and choose from? How can we be feral in our affinities? And, one of the things that is a through line in the collection of the field school and its many interlocutors is a deep investment and an engagement with artistic practice as one of the ways in which politics takes place, and one of the ways in which lives and narratives are made and unmade. And so perhaps this is another equally giant question, but I think it's a useful one on the tails of a question about feminism, which is, why is art, broadly conceived, one of the modes through which you choose to communicate?
Yeah, I've been creating art, I've been writing as long as I can remember, and it's just been the way that I've always expressed myself. I am one of those people where I have a really vast and internal world that I don't always communicate to people, but when I do communicate it, I really feel seen, and I think it really creates a lot of validity to different experiences that a lot of people share, but I don't think we always talk about. Even if there's so much divisiveness and separation between different, schools of thought and different communities, a lot of us have the same struggles across the board. And thinking historically, our ancestors had the same struggles as us in many different ways. They might not have looked the same, but knowing that our ancestors were just like us in many ways, and we're queer and we're trans in their own ways is so beautiful, and it's so important for me to be able to express that through art and to express that commonality of experience that highlights our unique, experiences, but also recognizes that we can all connect on a very basic level to each other, which I think is really beautiful.